Hello, kiddies.
Okay.
I brought my little friend in 2D. Everybody's going, when is it going to come out in 4K? Like, I'm still working on 2D.
He sat way over there, so I'm going to sit over here.
Oh, you didn't have to sit that far.
Okay.
I just thought it would be easier to, you know, if you're too close, then you wind up like this, as opposed to this to the audience.
And then I accidentally
It's
put
my
hand
old,
up.
my days as a stage actor. This is downstage and that's upstage. Does anybody know why? Because they used to have the stage raked like this, so that when people were sitting lower, you could still see somebody when they went upstage or downstage. Somebody's standing behind them, and so they called it upstage, downstage. There you go. You're like, who the fuck cares?
There's kids here. And
I
that's your
care! I care! And look, if they've dragged their kids to this,
fault. That's right.
they have more problems than having them hear me say the F word. No, thank you for ensuring my retirement by bringing your kiddies and getting them hooked on Tales from the Crypt, the gateway drug to horror.
It's like a Muppet that wants to kill me.
Kind of. You know, I was actually having a conversation with somebody this morning. We were talking about, I think it was you guys. We were talking about how the thing that's cool about horror, what is it about horror that we love so much? And it's the idea that you can have that part of yourself stimulated without actually putting yourself in physical danger. Well, I guess it depends on what neighborhood you're watching the movie, but you know, you experience death in front of you, and no, you know, like maybe you would get killed in that scenario and that kind of thing, but you're not like a roller coaster. You know, when you first get on a roller, you're a kid, and your friends are like, let's go on that roller coaster. You're like, oh, I'm getting on that thing, and then you get on it, and you know, oh God, I feel so good. I screamed my head off. It was so much fun. It's kind of, you know, then you get back on it and you go, nah, I need one bigger. I need one scarier, you know. And it's the same thing with horror, kind of, you know. And The Crypt Keeper kind of was your introduction to horror as a kid. I mean, let's face it, he was written to be kind of like a kid show host. I had the comic books as a kid. I had to hide them from my mother. He was mentioning William Gaines. William Gaines was the amazing man who created EC Comics. EC used to stand for Educational Comics back in the day. I think we were talking about this, Johnny. And then they started writing some comic books for kids that were based on Westerns, and then they came out with this horror stuff. And it was caught on so quickly that people were afraid of it, and they tried to get Congress to ban the comic books because they thought they caused juvenile delinquency. So what's your point? I mean, literally the reason they put age codes on comic books today are because that was what the solution they came up with for the comic books that were the Tales from the Crypt, Tales from the Vaults, Two-Fisted Tales, all these different EC comics that our show was based off of from the 50s and 60s. And so I was a little kid when I used to take them from my grandfather's store. My cousins would be reaching for the girly magazines and I'd be grabbing Tales from the Crypt. That's what it tells you about me. But, my mom was like, oh, those cause juvenile delinquency, you can't have those. You know, so I would get Casper comics and put the covers on my Tales from the Crypt comic books and she I was reading them. But the fact that was what the show was based on, you know, made it kind of controversial, but at the same time it did speak to kids. You know, he's so much as talking to you like, hello kitties, hello boils and girls. You're almost waiting for like the birthday roll to come up, like from a kid show that's saying whose birthday it is. Timmy in, you know, Spokane, Washington, you know, birthday is today, you know, kind of thing. And so little did we know, even though we came out with the cartoon and that kind of thing, that most of our audience were kids. Because it was HBO, and I had done HBO's first series. My first television series was called First and 10. And for those of you who don't remember, it was HBO's first series. A lot of people didn't have HBO yet, so they didn't really know that much about it, but it was on HBO. It was their first series, and it ran for 6 years. And 7 years maybe, I was on it for 6 years. It was about a football team called the California Bulls. And I played a character named Zagreb Shkenuski. I was a Bulgarian field goal kicker. I could kick 60-yard field goals, and it was a really funny character. But they had real football players on the show. They had O.J. Simpson was the general manager. Yes, I worked with O.J. for 6 years.
You were as shocked as anybody.
Oh gosh, especially when you would cut his meat. But I know, always morbid. Once morbid, always morbid.
That's a reminder, everybody, turn your phones off while we're in the...
I never have my ringer on my phone.
It's his
I feel bad because that's my buddy that just had heart surgery.
Bring it down, why don't you?
Let me turn that off, first of all. Luckily, I had the scary music on. If he knew that's the music that I had for him, for having heart surgery. Oh my God. Where was I before I was so rudely interrupted by my phone?
First and 10.
Oh, First and 10. And Delta Burke, who was on Designing Women, you may remember her. That was her first series. She played the owner of the team. Chris Maloney, who's on SVU, was a quarterback on the team. And again, so it was, for a lot of us, it was our first series. And so, you know, we knew that a lot of people didn't have HBO yet, but Tales from the Crypt was one of those shows that helped really get people onto HBO. So, but most of them were adults, so we assumed it was adults watching the show, not kids. Of course, they came up with the cartoon and that kind of thing, but you know, the stories you folks have been telling me about how like my parents wouldn't let me watch it, so I watched it with my grandma on the weekends, you know, that kind of thing. You know, I had a guy tell me that his parents were divorced and his dad would come into town and stay in a hotel, and the hotel that he stayed in had HBO, so, and that was their thing to do on Saturday night, was watch Tales from the Crypt together. And I'm like, oh my God, your parents were so cool. Mine were not. And so, but there you go. In the tradition of the comic book, it's continued through with the series, and you'll notice that people are always looking for stuff. You know, people bring up some of the most unusual stuff to be signed. I mean, of course, there's the Funko Pops and stuff, Crypt Keeper not being one of them, only because the licensing isn't available for it, but for our version of it. But so many different things, but then there's some of the old stuff, like the little Crypt Keeper doll or the comic books and that kind of stuff. And they made those in limited editions, so they'd be collectible, just like the comic book, you know? So it's been kind of cool seeing it evolve this way. So many people, the one thing that's unique about having such a young audience, or were young when, I'm not saying some of you are old now, but that they were so young when I did the show, was that they don't know my career prior to that, and all the sitcoms and stuff that I did on camera. Like every once in a while, like Friends will come on or something, and I played the director and finally gave Joey a job, or something like that. People like go, oh my God, I didn't know that was the Crypt Keeper guy that played, when they go back and watch it now, because I was a character actor, I played something different in everything that I did. But so it's kind of an interesting evolvement to becoming a voice actor. I was saying I started in the theater, and it pays very little. I worked. I got off Broadway theater, eventually got some Broadway theater and that kind of thing, but I made such little money. I made more money street performing in front of the Metropolitan Museum on Fifth Avenue in New York than I ever made in the theater. So it was kind of an interesting, I would do some pretty bizarre stuff, like climb the building across the street. And people could see me from 2 blocks on the other side and go, what's this guy doing? And they'd come and sit on the steps of the museum like it was a theater, and I would start my act. You know, I was in whiteface, so they knew I was going to do an act. And eventually, auditioning, these guys would see me and they go, this guy would be great in our play. And I got in a musical called 3 Guys Naked from the Waist Down. And you're like, okay, that's a gay review in the village. Well, no. It was a musical about stand-up comics. The reference of Naked from the Waist Down is a stand-up reference to how you feel when you're bombing. You know, you feel totally exposed. And starred myself along with Scott Bakula, who you all know from all of his work. And Scott and I are still friends all these years later. And the third guy who wrote the piece named Jerry Coker, who was a Broadway actor, and it was about these 3 comics. Think Dreamgirls. Does everybody know the show Dreamgirls? Think Dreamgirls, but with stand-up comics. So it's a musical about stand-up comics with only 3 actors in the whole show. We also played, once we made it big, you know, we play all the you know, show hosts and the guys who write about us in the newspapers and the stewardesses on the airlines. So you're always catching what's happening to us through these comedy routines that these 3 comics were doing. And I played this kind of suicidal, Andy Kaufman-ish kind of stand-up. And the show got a lot of attention for me, and people assumed that I was a stand-up. So I got approached by a show named Star Search. Who remembers Star Search? You know, Star Search was, you know, a much lower key show than America's Got Talent, but it was.
But it had Ed McMahon.
It had Ed McMahon as the host, and it started a whole rash of those kind of competition performance shows, and they had stand-up and acting and singers and bands and spokesmodels. I don't know why they had that category, but they did. So they approached me while I was doing the show, and they said, hey, we want you to be on Star Search. I'm like, as a singer? I go, you know, I'm in a musical, I can sing. I sing pretty good, you know, but they had Sam Harris on the show, and this guy was killing it, you know. If you've never seen him perform, he was really, really good, and wound up performing on Broadway and all this stuff, but he was killing it on the show. I was like, I can't sing like that guy. And they're like, no, we want you to come on as a stand-up comic. And I was like, you know, I'm not really a stand-up comic, right? It's part of playing in the show. And they go, well, you can win $100,000. I'm like, shit, did you see my act? You know? I was like, well, okay, I've street performed, I've worked in sketch comedy. I can come up with 2.5 minutes each week. You know, I would do like The Wizard of Oz in 2.5 minutes. It's a twister, Dorothy, let me in. Come on, Toto. As coroner, I must concur, I thoroughly examined. We represent the lollipop hills, the lollipop hills, the lollipop hills. I can't get that high anymore. Let the glorious news be spread at last, the wicked witch is dead. Who killed my sister? Was it you with the ruby slippers? Oh, rubbish, you have no powers here. Be gone before someone drops a house on you. All right, I'll get you, my pretty. Dog, too. Fly, fly. What's them? That's the castle of the Wicked Witch. Oh, Dorothy's in that awful place. Oh, I hate to think of her in there. Fellas, we've got to get her out. Why are you planning to get in there? And you're gonna lead us. All right, I'll go in there for Dorothy. We can witch or no wicked witch. Gods or no gods is just one thing I want you fellas to do. What's that? Talk me out of it. Anyway, you get the idea. So I kept winning, and I was like, oh shit, what am I going to come up with this week? So I kept coming up with this stuff and winning, and I wound up in the semifinals. And I went up against this young comedian named Rosie O'Donnell. And I beat Rosie O'Donnell in the semifinals. And then I came up against this guy Sinbad in the finals. And I beat Sinbad in the finals. I won $100,000. And they go, you're gonna open for Tom Jones in Vegas. And I'm like, I can't open for Tom Jones in Vegas. They're like, why not? I got no fucking act. I've been making this shit up 1 week at a time, you know? So like, you know, get in the clubs, put it together into a 20-minute act, and you can open, and I opened for Lou Rawls, I opened for the Temptations and the Four Tops on their TNT tour, I opened for Rodney Dangerfield, Richard Belzer, Bobby, you know, all these different acts. And the next thing I know, I'm doing stand-up at the Improv in LA, and you know, getting on sitcoms, and the first show that I got was First and 10 series that I got. And the next thing I know, I'm doing all this stuff. Well, bring that all around to the fact that everybody knew I do all these voices in my act because I really didn't have an act. And my favorite thing to do was to sit in the back and watch the other comedians work, because this is when Jerry Seinfeld was coming up, and Bill Maher, and Adam Sandler, and you know, and all these different guys were just starting to become established. Sam Kinison, I mean, all these guys, and I would just, I didn't have to pay a dime, because I was working there. I could go sit in the back and watch all these other comedians work. It was one of the most fun things I ever got to do. And but everybody knew me, you know, as a stand-up comic, and you know, I could play clubs across America and open for these acts and stuff. But what I wanted to do, get acting work. Eventually, my work moved all into acting, and then as you get older, they just don't have parts for you, and you don't even really have to be that old. There's just less and less parts the older you get. You know, more and more people were like, "Hey, you do all these voices. Come do, you know, the Crypt Keeper's a great voice. We want you to do Deadpool." So I was the first voice of Deadpool. And oh, you know, Charlie Adler's leaving Tiny Toons. Can you do Buster Bunny? Sure, I can do Buster Bunny. You know, next thing I know, I'm doing some of the biggest voices in Hollywood, and it's kept me working into my 30s. And I have my studio at home, and I don't even have to get in my pajamas most days to do my work. So I mean, I love it. And obviously, I worked hard for all those years. I started in New York, and you know, working on the street and all these different things, making my way into the business. But truly, you guys have to know that none of this was lost on me to come to a horror convention and spend the time talking about a show that I loved, because I loved the show. I didn't know whether people would remember it at all, especially on HBO, which wasn't a big show, a big network at the time. And it could have been one of the really crappy shows that I got paid a crap load of money for, but nobody ever would remember. And when, oh, you were on that show. We really loved you on that show. I hated that show. You know, it's like, but it's not. It's Tales from the Crypt. It's something I collected a comic book for, and that's why I come. I come, you know, not only to be seen by you, but to see you, because I know that you are enjoying that show that I had the privilege of being a part of as much as I do. And so that's why I enjoy doing it, and that's why it's so much fun to have that, to relive it. You know, I mean, horror is bigger than it's ever been. I have people who, you know, who are the biggest up and coming people in horror, you know, call me to come do their project or to come be a part of it, and they don't have much money to pay or whatever like that. And I'm like, who cares? I'm gonna go have fun. I'm gonna do the opening for Ice Nine Kills on their tour. I did the opening for them. They paid me nice, but they make money. They were like, here, dude, we're so happy to have you. Here, you know, go fix your fence. You know, go put solar on your house. You know, it's like, you know, because this is what I do for a living. So, you know, when somebody pays you for something, you're like, that's what it means, just like your jobs, you know. So I really enjoy coming here, and I appreciate that you guys come out and spend the time with us to do it. Obviously, I mean, I get invited to a lot of the Comic Cons and stuff like that, but I don't really go. I mean, there's obviously a lot of other characters and voices and, shows that I worked on that people would like to have autographs for, and they can come to these and do that too, and they do. But it's not the concentration of us, the horror fans, People are like, hey, look, I got the Crypt Keeper tattoo. And I was like, oh, that's cool. First time somebody did it, and the guy went, can you sign it right here? I'm going to have it tattooed. And I was like, okay. Okay, I'll have to think about that. Oh, yeah, sure, why not? I don't use the same signature that I use on contracts and money. So, yeah, okay, we'll do that. And people are like, why don't you get a Crypt Keeper tattoo? I go, that'd be a little redundant, don't you think? Although I told somebody this story this morning, I did meet a guy who had himself tattooed on his ass. he was doing a benefit, and he was like, hey, if you guys, it was like a group like this, it wasn't even a lot of people. He goes, if you guys come up with $10,000 for this charity, I will have my own face tattooed on my ass. He came up with the $10,000, and he did it. He had
What was his name? Bobby Knight.
Is he a writer?
No, Bobby Knight, the former coach of the.
Oh.
That was his joke. That I have my face tattooed on my butt so they can bury me upside down, so my critics can kiss my butt.
Oh, that's hysterical. I didn't know that. That's hysterical. The other guy was he wrote like horror fiction. But it was, it's fun for me. I wouldn't show up if it wasn't fun. I mean, I could do without, solar or fixing my fence. So I come here to hang with you guys. And if you have any, if you have any questions.
Yes, we do have microphones set up here and here. If you guys have any questions,
I probably answered all of them for you already, but just the same. It's an interesting show to work on. We had the biggest producers in Hollywood making that show, which is why there were so many great stars on that show. And also, they tried to make it a playground for people to come show up and go, oh, Arnold, you want to direct? Come on, come do an episode. He did an episode, Michael J. Fox directed an episode. Michael Keaton directed an episode. Who else? There was all these different people, that came on and directed different episodes and stuff. And then we got the Frankenheimers and people like Toby Hooper, people like that to come do episodes of the biggest guys in horror. Everybody wanted to do it. And then, we could talk more about stuff like Demon Knight, which was, an amazing movie. 2 weeks ago, did a screening, and I hadn't seen it on the big screen in a long time. And it was me and Billy Zane was there, and Ernest Dickerson, the director, and Charlie Flesher was there, saying his weird shit. He's such a funny, weird guy. And Todd Masters, who made the demons and did the effects, and we were all there. And I hadn't seen it in the big screen in a long time. I was like, God, this is really good. It's got a better cast than most any horror movie you would see. Great soundtrack. I mean, everybody from Pantera to Trent Ratner. I mean, all these different people doing the soundtrack. Jada Pinkett really, even though she had done some other films, that one really made her a household name, and just a really great movie. And but the idea that we were working with these guys, the producers, and I don't know if you know this, but the producers were Joel Silver, who was the producer of all the Lethal Weapon movies and Matrix movies and the Die Hard movies, and I mean, forget it. He was also has a reputation of being one of the biggest assholes in the business, which I wouldn't say about any of the other producers. But when people go, why is Tales from the Crypt not back on the air? It's probably because of Joel Silver. EC Comics doesn't want to give us the rights back because they didn't like working with him. But he's out of the picture, so I can say that shit about him. Dick Donner, who was, directed all the Lethal Weapon movies and Goonies and Superman, and, was a big producer and director. Bob Zemeckis, who you know from Back to the Future and Forrest Gump and all the great movies that he made, and who was also dabbling in all these great effects and stuff. So that's why in some of the later episodes we had some cool effects that were incorporated into the show. Is Bob Zemeckis trying out his stuff, Walter Hill, who directed 48 Hours and Dreamscape and Warriors Come Out to Play, these really great movies. And David Giler, who was the producer of Alien. So, these are the people that produced this show. And so they could pretty much get anybody, and at that time they were the biggest in the business, so you could get anybody they wanted on it. It's funny to watch the last season of Tales from the Crypt, the 7th season, which originally we weren't slated to do a 7th season. But it was becoming popular in the UK, and so they wanted to do it over there. They wanted to do another season. We go, great, if you want to fund it and you want to do it over there, go ahead. So they did, and the actors that are in it are like Ewan McGregor and Daniel Craig and Emma Samms and all these different people that we didn't know who they were back then. They were not the big movie stars they are now, or even TV stars or anything. So that's kind of was their introduction to an American audience. So it's kind of cool. The show has a pedigree that I never expected it to have, and I'm certainly glad to have it. It's always refreshing when somebody comes up and asks me about something else, like, dude, how was it playing Shemp in the Three Stooges movie? And you're like, oh my God, you saw that? Yes. It's like that kind of thing. People are like, what? People come to my table and they go, why do you have Pocahontas on your table? I was Miko the raccoon, and they're like, what? Why do you have Deadpool on your table? I was the original voice of Deadpool. What? It's just as a voice actor, you get to play stuff you would never get to play on camera, which is so much fun. So it's a fun gig if you can get it. Yeah, it really is. No questions?
I have one.
Yes, Johnny.
When you were the Crypt Keeper, were you ever on set, or was your voice
Constantly.
recorded and then?
He was asking if I was ever on the set when I was doing the Crypt Keeper. Not constantly. That's actually not true. Because I really just had to go into the studio and record my stuff with Kevin Yeager and producers Gil Adler and Alan Katz, and because they were shot separately and most of the time by different directors than the episode. But sometimes the directors would come down just to give us a sense of what the tone of that they had shot, because we hadn't seen the episodes yet or whatever. And they were brilliantly put together. In fact, if you look at the earlier episodes of Tales from the Crypt, we had very little budget. People were like, why is it not on HBO? Because HBO didn't own it back then. They didn't have enough money to give you money for the whole budget, so they give you part of it, and you have to come up with somewhere else, and usually the somewhere else was wherever you were going to sell it to later. And so you retain the rights. When I say you, I meant my producers. So when it went on Fox, they're the ones that put it on Fox, not HBO. And so you won't see the earlier shows from HBO on HBO because they don't own them. If they were smart, they could probably license them for very little and put them on there, and a lot of people who want to go back and see them would do that, but they don't think that way. It was kind of like, they're always moving forward. Some of those guys die, and then you get younger guys from Harvard. It's like other guys. But if they had somebody on the set in the scenes with the Crypt Keeper, talking to the Crypt Keeper, they had me there so they could play to me off camera rather than having to get all the puppeteers. It took 3 guys just to make the face work on that puppet. Another guy to move the hand and the head, another guy to move the other arm, and then if the feet moved, they had a little woman that got under there with her feet going like this, So, rather than them having to play to a pre-recorded track, they could talk to a real actor. So like I was there with Arnold, I was there with Whoopi Goldberg when she shot hers. I don't think there was really a lot of other episodes that I remember that we shot with the Crypt Keeper on the set with another celebrity or something. It was maybe somebody tied up and screaming or something like that. But I remember one of my favorite was the Crypt Keeper playing golf, and he hits the ball into a skull's mouth. He goes, "That was my caddy Juan. I just got a hole in Juan." You know, this is one of my favorites. I told that at a golfing event, and they looked at me like, "What?" It takes a horror crowd to get that. But yeah, it was fun. I was invited down anytime I wanted. The one time I went down that I'll always remember is my parents had never seen anything shot, and I took them down to the set, and it was the day that Tim Curry was playing Winona. If you remember the episode Death of Some Salesman, Tim Curry played the mother, the father, and the daughter of these backwoods family, and they were shooting him as the daughter that day, and he looked so gruesome and so gross, but he was so committed to it. My parents just couldn't believe what they were seeing, but it was truly an honor to see him do his work doing that. Yeah. You have a question over here?
Yeah, so I'll shoot you on this. I'm sure you've answered this before, but what was one of your favorite episodes, be it watching or?
Well, definitely Death of Some Salesman, because Tim Curry was so good in it. I always loved Ventriloquist's Dummy with Don Rickles and Bobcat Goldthwait, because, you know, what great horror anthology or any, you know, sci-fi or whatever anthology doesn't have a great episode with a ventriloquist dummy.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's Outer Limits or Twilight Zone or any of those. And I thought they all had, you know, and of course Magic with Anthony Hopkins and that kind of thing. Always loved The Man Who Was Death with William Sattler, you know, who was also the star of Demon Knight. That was not our first episode shot, but our first episode shown. Walter Hill directed that episode. It's so stylish. They got Ry Cooder to come in and do the music, and you know, he kind of talks to the camera and he says, you know, it's the one about the executioner in the prison where he's the guy that pulls the electric chair, and then they abolished the death penalty, so he goes around, you know, like frying criminals in their hot tubs and stuff, you know, as a vigilante. And he gets caught. Of course, they reinstate the death penalty, and he gets fried in the end. And then they cut to the Crypt Keeper sitting in an electric chair, frying himself and getting off on it, which is just, to me, just one of the most fun things. Which brings me back to why I brought up about how we didn't have much of a budget to start with. Was the Crypt Keeper, Kevin was using spare parts, and yes, it is true that he used Chucky's eyes on the Crypt Keeper, because he had all these spare parts. He had made Chucky, and he had probably had some of the other mechanics or little servos and stuff. But if you look at the earlier episodes, the Crypt Keeper talks slower and more ominously. That's because his mouth didn't work very good. You know, so like I walked into the studio when I first had shot it. I mean, when I first auditioned for Kevin and did the voice that you all know, fast, funny, very stand-up-ishy, you know. But when we got in and started recording it, Kevin was like, no, we can't go that fast. The Crypt Keeper's mouth doesn't work very good. So we brought him into this more creepy kind of ominous. It's still funny, but it's a little more, you know, kind of thing. And then when the show was picked up and you know, Kevin begged for more money to spruce him up, and he talked, you know, like fast like a normal person. And so we were able to do that. And also at that time, Gil Adler and Alan Katz came and had taken over the show to produce it on a budget that needed to be produced on in order to keep it on the air. And so they were like, why does the Crypt Keeper only have to be in the crypt? Let's have him putting golf. Let's have him as Stanley Kowalski in A Streetcar Named Desire. Stella! You know, I mean, you know, we have John Kassir, who's an actor and a comedian and, you know, all this stuff, and can do all these other voices. Let's have the Crypt Keeper be able to do all that stuff. And so, you know, that was you know, that added to the fun of some of my favorite episodes of what they could do with the Crypt Keeper, you know, so that was some of some of the fun stuff.
What kind of notes did you get from HBO as the network? Did you guys, because it was such a different thing that was happening as cable was
I never got any
exploding?
notes. They pretty much cut me loose. I mean, it was funny. I would say stuff like, "I love a ghoul who'll give you head and then let you keep it," and I think it would never wind up on the show. Next week, the Crypt Keeper's there, and he's having dinner with some woman, and her head falls off in his lap, and he delivers that line. I'm like, great. But we had good writers on the show, so I didn't really get to write. I got to improvise for sure. I used to have to do 52 radio spots over 2 days. Every season we'd launch a new season, and they'd do the radio time, in the morning where people are driving to work listening to, Bob and Tim, on WBBC or whatever, and I would talk to those guys, in LA time, start at like 5 in the morning, and only doing the Crypt Keeper, never as myself in that instance. And so they would talk to the Crypt Keeper, and I have to make up everything I said. I don't have like a cheat sheet full of puns, and I go, oh, that's good one, throw in there, at this moment, and that kind of thing, and doing Howard Stern and all these different shows as the Crypt Keeper. So it was, it was a bit of that, but I don't think that HBO, especially with those producers, they probably have some horror stories and notes and that kind of stuff, but I don't think they ever, it was above my pay grade.
Well, I think that it might have been part of it in those early days of all of those cable channels trying to get a foothold. It felt like the Wild Wild West a little bit. There was a lot of spaghetti thrown at the wall. What's going to work? And I think that the show like yours really benefited.
They
from that.
they had a formula at HBO. It was sports, comedy, and sex. And the shows. I worked on First and 10, which had all three of those. I was comedy mostly. Thank God. They didn't pull me in for the sex part. But although they did, because they had a lot of real football players on there, so they would always like putting me in some bizarre scene with an 18-year-old or something. And I was like, what the fuck? Okay. Then there was Dream On, which I had a recurring character on Dream On. But they did a lot of that stuff. But Tales from the Crypt had, nudity and horror and that kind of thing. I remember them showing the first 3 episodes on a big screen for a screening as a premiere with some of the suits from HBO. And they were sitting like a couple rows in front of me. And I remember they're watching, and somebody goes, "Oh man, this is really great TV." And the guy next to him, and they were behind them, and the other guy goes, "It's not TV, it's HBO." And then both of the suits became their tagline. It's not TV, it's HBO. And they overheard a couple of guys in the audience saying that. Isn't that funny? But so, I'm sure I'm sure there was probably some you can't. It's certainly nowadays a lot of. I worked on the Three Stooges movie, and so I've met recently with the guys who run the Three Stooges legacy company, along with they produce things and that kind of thing, and they put Three Stooges on the air on certain networks and stuff like that. And they go, "Oh, you can't show that episode." And you're like, "It's the Three Stooges. It's from like the 40s and 50s." And they're like, "Nah, it's too, and they poked him in the eye, and it's like, I'm sorry, you're trying to make the Three Stooges politically correct? Why are you even bothering showing it? It's like our show certainly didn't try to be politically correct at all. It came right out of the comic books. And added a bit of nudity. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I know there was the Tales from the Crypt pinball machine that was one of the things.
one.
Yeah, they have one here in town too. The
Oh, do they?
Jedi Alliance local arcade does have a working.
Oh, it's a
Tales
good
from the
one,
Crypt.
too.
It's a good one. And my thought was what your role was, because it seems like it has voices, so I wondered if you did voices for that, and if that
All
is.
voices.
That's amazing.
There isn't a voice on it that's not mine.
Oh, that's fantastically cool. Is that the coolest piece of Tales from the Crypt tie-in merchandise or whatever that exists? Would the pinball machine be the coolest, or do you have some other favorites?
My absolute favorite is the Have Yourself a Scary Little Cryptmas album.
Yes.
I just think that's so well done. I was expecting to show up and have synthesizer tracks to sing to. They had a full orchestra that put down the tracks, and they just cut me loose for 2 days, and I recorded the entire thing. It's so good. I was just always sad that they only did one pressing and sold them all and never made more. I'm trying to get some licensing so that I can make more of them and offer them to the fans because it's so good. But the pinball machine was really cool. They paid me in a pinball machine, so they were like, "We don't really make money on a pinball machine. It's more for advertising, But we'll give you one, I was like, "Cool." Has a little plaque on it. This pinball machine is made for John Kassir. It's kind of cool. I was supposed to have like a lifetime service contract. You know how long that lasted. I did have a guy come to my house though that was servicing it. He's like, "Oh, I just came from Slash's house. He's got like a whole room full of pinball machines, and he has this pinball machine." And I told him I was coming to you next, and he said, "Oh, please get a signed photograph for me." So I signed it from one Axeman to another. Never got my photo from him. Damn Slash. One day whenever
Somebody get Miles Kennedy on the line.
Yes, there you go. But it was an honor to sign one for him. But it is really good. It's got more speakers on it than any pinball machine I've ever listened to. Like I cranked it up, and it was like, my parents never played, but they came to my house and my parents have since passed away at 99 and 94 years old, God bless them. But they were probably, I don't know what they were, 70s, 80s at the time they came to visit me in LA, and I couldn't get them off of it. It was unbelievable. My little mother sitting there banging away on this, school my little grandma, playing on this pinball machine. It's a really great pinball machine, yeah.
Very cool. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I'll sell mine for $50,000 if anybody's interested. I gotta fix a fence.
This is a lot of fence talk today, you guys.
Oh, you got a football?
Yes, all right. Outside of Tales from the Crypt, there were a bunch of other anthology horror series, Monsters, Tales from the Dark Side, Freddy Krueger's one, and the legacy ones, Twilight Zone, Night Gallery,
Outer Limits.
Do you actually have, outside Tales from the Crypt, your own favorites of the legacy ones or the
Oh, for
comic
sure.
ones?
I watched. They used to show Twilight Zone and Outer Limits back to back when I was a kid, at least in Baltimore, where I grew up, on Saturday afternoons. And like other kids would be out playing. My dad would, after our hard week of work, would be sleeping on the couch, and I'd sneak in there and watch Outer Limits and Tales from the Crypt. Twilight Zone. The first early night gallery hosted by Rod Serling was one of my favorites. And then one of my absolute favorites was Alfred Hitchcock Presents. And if you watch Alfred Hitchcock, he's stealing from the Tales from the Crypt comic books with all those puns and stuff. He is so good at it that you never would have gone, "Oh, yeah, he's doing a Tales from the Crypt." But obviously our show wasn't on the air yet, so he didn't get it from our show. But everybody was taking from those comic books. If you look at the way that everything is shot, whether it's Swamp Thing or any of that stuff, it all looks like the art from one of these comic books. In fact, they would use some of the comics as the storyboards for how they were going to shoot some of our episodes. Did you have more to your question?
Oh, no, just now, I do remember being here in this city when the Twilight Zone and Alfred Hitchcock Presents were both on in the afternoon every weekday. But yeah,
Cool. Awesome. Thank you. That's a good question. My favorite horror was, I didn't have videos or streaming or anything, so I had to look through the newspaper. My parents never would have spent the money to get a TV guide delivered to our house. So they had the newspaper version of that. I'd look through. We had this afternoon movie called Twilight Movie that they would show in Baltimore, and they would show everything from Doris Day movies to musicals to all the Universal Horror Monster stuff, Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, Mothra. They'd show the William Castle stuff like the Tingler, and all the Roger Corman stuff, especially the Edgar Allan Poe stuff. Having grown up with Baltimore, you always heard the Edgar Allan Poe lore, kind of stuff. So that was all my favorite stuff as a kid. I loved that stuff. The day I saw Abbott and Costello meets Frankenstein, I knew that was my favorite comedy. And I remember there's the scene where and I told somebody else that this morning, I remember the scene where they shipped Frankenstein from Transylvania. He's in a crate with all the packing material. They find him, and I was like, "Mom, you can order Frankenstein." Of course, I was flipping through my comic books until I found you could order Frankenstein, and of course, it was a 6-foot cutout of Frankenstein, which I'd wake up every morning and get closer and closer to my bed. It turned out it was my brother doing that to me. Yeah.
So I've always wondered what inspired the voice of the Crypt Keeper.
Oh, well, it was Kevin's puppet. I didn't know what I was going to do. I had ideas what I would do based on the comic book before I walked in, but when I was just excited, first of all, because I was on HBO and knowing that that everybody didn't have that channel yet. I was like, okay, it'll be another show on HBO, but I go, Tales from the Crypt, I love Tales from the Crypt as a kid. It'll at least be something cool for somebody like me. I'm a freak, But the coolest thing was to get to go down to Kevin Yeager's studio and see all his stuff, that he was working. He had all kinds of stuff all over the walls, and weird creature bodies and stuff, and versions of the Crypt Keeper he was working on. So, and he was running the auditions. So he had a casting director pick through people that would come in, and they'd take the ones that they thought were viable, they'd take it back to meet Kevin, and Kevin was just recording us on like a little boombox with a little mic, And I looked at him and I go, okay, that's rotten teeth and holes in his throat, so I'm going to give him texture. And then one of the things that was a big game changer was I could see all these other actors in there, and there was like some big actors, Michael Winslow, who does all those sound effects, and Charlie Flesher, who did Roger Rabbit for Joel Silver, and those guys, auditioning stuff. And they're all trying to make him really scary and creepy and stuff like that. I go, no, this guy's hysterical. You don't get it, he's funny as shit. And that's where the Alfred Hitchcock thing struck me. I go, Alfred Hitchcock was doing the Crypt Keeper, or at least my version of what I think the Crypt Keeper's be. He's got one eyebrow raised. He's supposed to let you know that this show is supposed to be fun to watch. And he's got a really great story that he's going to present to you. So, and then I was like, okay, he's got to have this great cackle. I'm going to bring in my Wicked Witch cackle. And I'm going to do it. I'm going to make him sound like the Crypt Keeper doing it, though. So I started doing it for Kevin, and I could tell he'd been sitting for hours, for days, listening to stuff. And I started doing that, and he went, keep going, give me like this. And I start doing it. He starts laughing. I start laughing. I'm like, great. Crypt Keeper laughs at his own shit. And I'm doing it, and next thing, very next day, he had me in to meet Joel Silver and Dick Donner, who were the hands-on producer at that time, in their office. And they go, great, Gabe, we'll see you on the set. It was maybe one of the easiest jobs I ever got. But at the same time, you're like, you go home going, yeah, I'll believe it when I get my contract. You get a phone call like 2 minutes later, oh, okay, so you got Tales from the Crypt, blah, 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 blah. But I was excited about doing it for me. I had no idea, 35 years, there in 1988 is when we started shooting. So, that's many years later that you guys would be like, how did you come up with that voice? That's how I came up with the voice.
Well, we actually have hit our time, but John, it was
Thank
a pleasure having you here. in
Pleasure's all
Spokane.
mine. If you have any other questions, come to my table. I'll be happy to answer them.
John's gonna be here all weekend for us, guys. Come by and talk. Good job, guys. He's a wonderful guy. One more big hand for Mr. John Kassir.
Thank you, kitties, and be careful what you ask for.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.